So I want to begin not with a whale or a turtle, but with a plastic bottle. At first glance, a bottle looks simple. You buy it, you drink from it, and you throw it away. But if we track its biography, that simplicity vanishes. Before it reaches us, it's passed through oil and gas extraction, design, manufacturing, and advertising processes. And after we use it, another system takes over: bins, waste collection, recycling markets, and trade. And sometimes the bottle keeps moving into rivers, seas, and the wider environment. Bob and Rebecca have talked about what plastic does in the water to ecosystems and organisms. But I want to ask a different question. What kind of society produces an ocean full of plastic? My argument is that ocean plastic is not merely a problem in the ocean, it is a problem that society sends there. And that is why it's also a question for churches. Not because churches are uniquely responsible for ocean plastic, but because churches are communities that speak about creation, neighbour, justice, responsibility, and hope. And if plastic pollution shows us something about the kind of society we have made, then it also asks what kind of society we are called to become. The UN Environment Programme estimates that every day the equivalent of 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic enters aquatic ecosystems. And every year, up to 23 million tonnes of plastic leak into the environment. These are environmental facts, but they're also social truths. Garbage trucks do not drive themselves into the sea. Behind them is a system of production, consumption, disposal, regulation, and responsibility. A useful starting point is the phrase throw away. We often focus on the throw, the individual action, but the away is somewhat more revealing. Where is away? This is a question churches are well placed to ask because away often means out of sight, out of mind, and out of moral responsibility. But Christian faith has never been only about what happens in front of us. It asks us how our lives affect neighbours we never meet, places we may never visit, and generations that we will never see. In the social sciences, scholars working in discard studies argue that away is not really a place, it's a social arrangement. At first, it might mean a bin or a truck, but as that system stretches, it includes landfills, export routes, and workers we rarely see. When that arrangement fails, away becomes the coastline. This is why plastic pollution is not just a story about objects in the wrong place. Anthropologist Mary Douglas famously described dirt as matter out of place. A shoe is not dirty in itself, but it becomes dirty if it's placed on the dining table. Plastic in the ocean is certainly matter out of place, but it also tells us something about the social order that put it there in the first place. So plastic pollution is not only a waste problem, it is about what gets produced, how products are designed, whether waste systems can cope, who handles what others discard, and who is left responsible after plastic has lost its value. This matters because the way we define the problem shapes the solutions we will find acceptable. For years, many of us have been told a comforting story. If we recycle properly, the system will work. And recycling matters, but the OECD estimated that in 2019, only 9% of global plastic waste was ultimately recycled. The rest was incinerated, landfilled, mismanaged, burned, dumped, or leaked into the environment. Individual action is not pointless. Refusing unnecessary packaging, carrying a reusable cup, or recycling carefully can create new habits. But individual action cannot carry the whole weight of a system that was never designed to handle this much plastic. This is where the cleanup story becomes both useful and limited, as Rebecca's just shown us. Projects like the ocean cleanup remove real plastic from real water. Beach cleans and river interceptors can make a difference in particular places. But cleanup can become too attractive as a story. It gives us visible action, nets, boats, volunteers, before and after photographs. And those images are powerful, but they can make the problem look as though it only begins after plastic has become waste. It's like mopping the floor while the tap is still running. The mopping matters, but at some point, someone has to ask why the tap is on in the first place. That's why the proposed UN Plastics Treaty really matters. It forces governments to decide what kind of problem plastic pollution really is. In 2022, UN member states agreed to negotiate a legally binding international instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. Crucially, the mandate called for a full life cycle approach, and that phrase matters. It means the problem does not begin on the beach, it begins much further upstream with fossil fuels, polymer production, product design, corporate strategy, trade, advertising, and the everyday assumption that things can be used briefly and then thrown away. The most recent full round of negotiations took place in Geneva in August 2025. There, delegates debated how far the treaty should reach. Should it regulate product design and chemicals of concern? Should it limit production itself? And who should pay for implementation, monitor compliance, and support countries with fewer resources? Now, they didn't agree on a final treaty text. These things take time. And that failure was not just a diplomatic delay, it exposed a deeper disagreement over responsibility. If plastic pollution is mainly a waste management issue, the answer is better collection and disposal. If it's a design issue, the answer is safer and more reusable products. But it's also a production issue. And then the answer has to include how much new plastic enters the world in the first place. That's the central tension. Do we turn off the tap or do we buy a bigger mop? A social account of ocean plastic also has to ask a justice question. Who is harmed, who is hurt, and who cleans up? Plastic pollution does not affect everyone equally. Small island states may receive waste carried by distant currents. Communities near petrochemical sites may be affected before plastic even becomes a product. Coastal communities and fishers often encounter plastic at the other end of the chain, and waste workers handle materials that wealthier consumers never see again. One important example that Rebecca's already mentioned is ghost gear. That's fishing gear that's been abandoned, lost, or discarded at sea. Nets, ropes, lines, tarps, and pots do not simply disappear when they are lost. They keep catching fish, entangling marine animals, damaging habitats, and breaking down into smaller and smaller fragments. Ghost gear is especially visible around coastlines where fishing grounds, harbours, reefs, beaches, and coastal livelihoods meet. It also shows that ocean plastic is not only something carried from land into the sea, it's also produced through the working systems of the sea itself. But just ending plastic is not simple. Some plastics are useful. Some are even necessary. Fishing gear itself can be essential to livelihoods. So the question is not whether all plastic disappears tomorrow. The question is who decides which plastics are necessary, who profits from them, who bears the costs, and who is protected when the systems change. There's also a question of knowledge. Marine science is essential. We've seen that today. It tells us how plastics move, they fragment, they persist, and affect ecosystems. But ocean plastic is also a problem of how evidence is gathered, trusted, and acted upon, especially in the international arena. A clear example is the Express Pearl disaster off Sri Lanka in 2021. When this container ship caught fire and sank, it released huge quantities of plastic pellets or nurdles into the sea. They washed onto beaches, entered fishing grounds, and disrupted coastal livelihoods. What matters is not only the spill itself, but the knowledge it created. Scientists could trace the environmental impacts, the local fishers knew what had changed in their water, and coastal residents could see where the noodles were starting to accumulate. Cleanup workers knew what recovery really looked like on the ground in a way that international politicians often don't. So the lesson is not that science matters less, it's that science needs to travel with local knowledge, public trust, and political action. Ocean plastic is not only a problem of evidence, it's also a problem of whose evidence counts. So this brings us back to the plastic bottle. Earlier, I borrowed Mary Douglas's phrase that dirt is matter out of place. Now, ocean plastic is certainly matter out of place, but it's also responsibility out of place. Responsibility has too often been shifted downstream. Producers pass it to consumers, wealthier societies pass it on to poorer ones, Land-based ecosystems pass it into the sea, and the present passes it into the future. This is why ocean plastic is the church's problem. It's about creation treated as disposable, neighbours harmed at a distance, responsibility pushed onto the vulnerable, and a culture that has forgotten where away really is. That is why the solution can not only be to clean up what's already floating in the water, clean up matters though, but if plastic pollution is responsibility out of place, then the task is also to put responsibility back where it belongs, into production decisions, product design, corporate accountability, waste infrastructure, international law, and support for the communities most affected. Churches can be part of that work in practical and public ways. They can reduce unnecessary plastic in their own life, as Bob explained. They can form communities of restraint, repair, and reuse. They can join local cleanup efforts. They can stand with communities most affected by pollution, and they can use their public voice to call for systems that put responsibility back upstream. There is reason not to be fatalistic. Plastic pollution is not inevitable, but the answer is not simply to remove plastic after it's escaped into the environment. The answer is to act earlier and across the whole system to reduce unnecessary production, design, and products for reuse. Invest in waste systems and make producers responsible for the materials they put into the world. So the question is not only how do we clean plastic from the ocean, it is who owns the ocean's plastic problem. The answer is that all of us are connected to it, as Rebecca showed, but not all of us are equally responsible, equally harmed, or equally hurt. The ocean is not society's away. It is where the effects of social choices become visible. And if we want less plastic in the sea, we have to look not only at the sea, but at the systems on land that keep sending plastic there. For churches, that means the task is not simply to feel guilty about plastic, nor to imagine that small actions alone will solve the crisis. It is to tell the truth. Creation is not disposable. The ocean is not away. And our neighbours include those who live with the consequences of what others, including ourselves, throw away. Thank you very much.